Konnichiwa minasan, Nihongo no gakusei desu. In this lesson, we will learn the Japanese passive sentences. In Japanese, the passive voice is commonly used when the speaker wants to inject the sentence with emotion. For example, Japanese speakers often use a passive voice in situations where they want to convey a sense that they are a victim. In other words, they use the passive voice to describe when something bad has happened to them. But some passive sentences are not unfavorable. In English, a passive sentence is a sentence where the subject does not perform the action of the verb. So the action of the verb is done to the subject instead. Okay? For example, these sentences here. A car is being driven by my friend. So here, the car is the subject. It is the one being acted upon by the friend. A book is being read by my classmate. So the book is the one being acted upon by the classmate. So the book is the subject. The food is bought outside. So here, food is the subject and it is the one being acted upon by somebody. Okay? So in passive sentences, the subject is not the doer of the action. Okay? Okay, so we have here this sentence, Tomodachi ga kuruma o tsukaimashita. My friend used my car. So here is a simple sentence, but this is not a passive sentence. Okay? So the subject here is the doer of the action. So the friend is the one using the car. The subject is the doer of the action. Okay? So the subject is using the car. But in this sentence, watashi wa tomodachi ni kuruma o tsukawaremashita. The car was used by my friend. Now again, remember that we have just said that the passive voice in Japanese is used when the subject is being the victim or being inconvenienced by the action. So in this second sentence, the subject, watashi wa, is the one being considered as the victim and the doer of the action is the friend, tomodachi ni. Tomodachi ni. In this case, when we want to say that the subject is being the victim of the action by another person, we use the passive voice of the verb. Okay? We use the passive voice. Tsukawaremashita. Tsukawaremashita. So the car was used by my friend, and it implies that there is a sense of inconvenience or dissatisfaction on the part of the subject. Okay, again, here we have watashi wa tomodachi ni kuruma o tsukawaremashita. Tsukawaremashita. So here, the subject is the one affected by the action, that is watashi. And then tomodachi followed by the particle ni. It is the doer of the act which caused the inconvenience. Kuruma, the object, and then the verb in the passive voice. This is the act done by the friend, by the doer. Okay? So how do we conjugate these verbs here? For example, taberu. This is a ru verb, taberu. So we just change it into tabera here in the hiragana ladder. So ru becomes ra. Taberu, tabera. And then we add reru. Taberareru, taberareru. So this is the conjugation for rareru. Rareru. Okay. So we have rareru, rarenai, raremasu, raremasen, rareta, raremashita, rarenakatta, raremasen deshita. And then the te form is rarete. Okay? For verbs ending in ku, so iku, iku. Again, in the hiragana ladder, change it to a, becomes ika, ika. and then add reru. So ikareru, ikareru. For verbs ending in su, for example, hanasu becomes hanasa, and then add reru, hanasareru, hanasareru. For verbs ending in tsu, matsu, matsu becomes matta, matta, and then reru, matareru, matareru. For verbs ending in mu, like yomu, yomu becomes yoma, yoma, and then add reru, yomareru, yomareru. For verbs ending in ru again, so toru becomes tora, tora. So ru becomes ra, and then reru, torareru, torareru. For gu, we have isogu, isogu. Here it becomes isoga, isoga, and then add isogareru, isogareru. This is the passive voice. For verbs ending in bu, like asobu, becomes asoba, asoba, and adreru, asobareru, asobareru. For verbs ending in kau, kau becomes kawa instead of ka. Okay, so kau becomes kawa, wa, not kaa. It's kawa. So kau, kawa, kawareru, kawareru. For irregular verbs like kuru, it becomes kora. So kora reru, kora reru. For suru, becomes sareru, sareru. That's it, sareru. Okay, example. Takeshi-san wa Mary-san ni yoku warawaremasu. Takeshi is often laughed at by Mary. So again, in Japanese, commonly, the passive voice has a negative connotation. So Takeshi feels embarrassed. So this is unfavorable to him. He's being laughed at by Mary. Warawaremasu comes from warau. Its mass form is warawaremasu. Takeshi is the one affected by the action. Mary is the doer of the act, which causes the embarrassment or inconvenience. And then the act done by Mary in the passive form. Warawareru, warawaremasu. Okay? Yamashita sensei wa Professor Yamashita 誰かにパスワードを盗まれたそうです。パスワードを盗まれたそうです。I hear that Professor Yamashita had his password stolen. So, his password was stolen by somebody. Again, the passive voice, it means Takeshi feels embarrassed or inconvenienced by that act of stealing. Nusumareta comes from nusumu, nusumu. So des means I hear that. Yamashita sensei wa dareka ni pasuwado o nusumareta sou desu. So Professor Yamashita is the one affected by the action, and this someone is the doer of that act which caused inconvenience, and the act done by that someone, by the doer, in the passive voice. This is in the passive voice. Okay, other examples. Kodomo toki, when I was a child, ane ni takusan nikki o yomaremashita. When I was a child, my sister always read my diary. Literally, my diary, nikki, was always read by my sister. And this implies that you were annoyed by that action. Kodomo toki ane ni takusan nikki o yomaremashita. When I was a child, my sister always read my diary to my annoyance. ケーキが誰かに食べられた。ケーキが誰かに食べられた。So, 食べられた comes from 食べる, of course. The cake was eaten by somebody. And it implies that you were annoyed by that action. ケーキが誰かに食べられた。食べられた is the casual past tense of 食べられる. But some passive sentences are not unfavorable. So for example, この漢字がいつも使われています. This kanji is always used. この漢字がいつも使われています. So this is not a negative sentence. It has no negative connotation. Okay? Okay, another one. 私はその人にデートに誘われました。デートに誘われました。I was asked to a date by this person. 誘われました comes from 誘う、誘う。誘われる、誘われる、誘われました。私はその人にデートに誘われました。私は兄に友達に紹介されました。私は兄に友達に紹介されました。I was introduced by my older brother to his friend. So, 紹介されました comes from 紹介される which comes from 紹介する to introduce. その人はみんなに尊敬されています。その人はみんなに尊敬されています。That person is looked up by everyone. 尊敬されて comes from 尊敬される which comes from 尊敬する to respect or to be looked up to. In these sentences, we have the non-human subject. So here, ここに公園が this is the non-human subject, 公園。公園が作られます。作られます。A park will be built here. この絵はピカソによって描かれました。This picture was painted by Picasso. If there is a non-human subject, we can use for the doer によって、によって。Okay? So it was painted by Picasso. ピカソによって描かれました。その年、オリンピックは開かれませんでした。開かれませんでした。The Olympics were not held that year. So, 開かれませんでした comes from 開かれる、開かれる which comes from 開く、開く. Alright? Okay, so let's practice. We're going to change the following into the passive form. For example, 飲む. 飲む becomes 飲まれる、飲まれる. And these are the other verbs that we are going to conjugate in the passive form. 食べる、やめる、なくす、する、捨てる、壊す、見る、笑う、嘘をつく、連れて行く、バカにする、タバコを吸う、立つ、来る、怒る、盗む。Okay? Okay, for the first set, we have 食べる becomes 食べられる、食べられる。For やめる becomes やめられる、やめられる。For なくす it becomes なくされる、なくされる。For する becomes される、される。For 捨てる becomes Suterareru, suterareru. For kawasu, kawasareru, kawasareru. For miru, mirareru, mirareru. For warau, warawareru, warawareru. And for the second set, we have uso tsuku becomes uso tsukareru, uso tsukareru. For tsurete iku, it becomes tsurete ikareru, tsurete ikareru. Baka ni suru, to insult, to make fool of. Baka ni suru becomes baka ni sareru, baka ni sareru. For tabako su becomes tabako sowareru, tabako sowareru. Tatsu becomes tatareru, tatareru. Kuru becomes korareru, korareru. For okuru becomes okorareru. And for nusumu, nusamareru, nusamareru. Okay? So we're going to translate these sentences using the passive form. For example, Takeshi, his bag was taken by a thief. Takeshi-san wa dorobo ni, dorobo, so dorobo, thief, dorobo ni kaban no toraremashita. Takeshi-san wa dorobo ni kaban no toraremashita. As for Takeshi, his bag was taken by a thief. Its active voice is dorobo ni Takeshi-san no kaban no toremashita. The thief took Takeshi's bag. This second sentence is an active voice, so the subject is the doer of the act. Alright, next sentence. As for Takeshi, he was laughed at by Mary. Takeshi-san wa Mary-san ni warawaremashita. Takeshi-san wa Mary-san ni warawaremashita. So, as for Takeshi, he was laughed at by Mary. So this is the English translation of this Japanese sentence. As for Takeshi, his wallet was stolen by a thief. Takeshi-san wa dorobo ni saifu wo nusumaremashita. Takeshi-san wa dorobo ni saifu wo nusumaremashita. As for Takeshi, his wallet was stolen by a thief. As for Takeshi, he was hit, punched by his friend. Here we have Takeshi-san wa tomodachi ni naguraremashita. Takeshi-san wa tomodachi ni naguraremashita. Takeshi was hit or was punched by his friend. And they are not friends anymore. As for Takeshi, so the baby was crying. So this is a little bit tricky. As for Takeshi, the baby was crying, so it means that Takeshi was annoyed by the crying baby. Takeshi-san wa akachan ni nakaremashita. Takeshi-san wa akachan ni nakaremashita. So the baby was crying and Takeshi was annoyed. That's the natural translation. He was annoyed by the baby who was crying. So this is in the past tense. Nakaremashita. Nakareru comes from naku, naku, to cry. So it was raining and Takeshi was inconvenienced. Takeshi-san wa ame ni furaremashita. Takeshi-san wa ame ni furaremashita. So furaremashita comes from furu. As for Takeshi, he was bitten by a mosquito. Takeshi was bitten by a mosquito. Takeshi-san wa ka ni sasaremashita. Takeshi-san wa ka ni sasaremashita. So sasaremashita comes from Sasareru, which comes from sasu, to bite. Takeshi was turned down by Ayaka, so he was sad. Takeshi-san wa Ayaka-san ni furaremashita. Furaremashita was turned down, like courting. Takeshi was turned down. Takeshi-san wa Ayaka-san ni furaremashita. So comes from furu. As for Takeshi, when he was a child, he was bullied by a classmate. Takeshi was bullied by a classmate. So, kodomo no toki, Takeshi-san wa kurasumeito ni ijimeraremashita. Kodomo no toki, Takeshi-san wa kurasumeito ni ijimeraremashita. When Takeshi was a child, he was bullied by a classmate. When he was a child, his uncle was angry with him. Kodomo no toki, Takeshi-san wa oji-san ni, so oji-san, short i, oji-san, oji-san ni okoraremashita. So it comes from okoru, okoru, to be angry, okoru. Kodomo no toki, Takeshi-san wa oji-san ni okoraremashita. When Takeshi was a child, his uncle was angry with him. Alright, thank you for listening and watching, and if you like my videos and my channel, please consider subscribing. I will be posting more videos in the near future. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have learned something.